Hi, True Avatars, and welcome back to another episode of True Avatars, a queer video game podcast. This is episode 5, and I am your host, Zoe Wild. My pronouns are she, her. I am a trans feminine gamer and YouTuber. This week, I'm joined by my friend Devona, a non-binary gamer. Devona's pronouns are they, them. Hi, Devona.
Hey, what's up, gamers? I'm Devona. I normally go by Helldevo on Twitch and like everywhere, But yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me. And also this week, I'm welcoming back Amy-Lynn, trans feminine gamer, and my friend whose pronouns are she, her. Hello, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
So, just to kind of break the ice and get us into the swing of things, I wanted to ask you both what you've been playing lately, and we can start with Devona.
What I'm even playing right now, I've discovered this is bad. YouTube has games now, and they're all like the shittiest app games you could possibly find. And the thing that makes it compelling is that all the monetization on these shitty games is taken out. So if you ever play like a shitty app game and it's full of microtransactions and it's terrible because like every 2 seconds they're like, do you want to buy our super cash for like whatever to make everything easier and the game kind of playable? That's not there, even though they still have the shitty like super cash that you can buy. It's just like if when you're like, well, how do I get the super cash? It's like, I don't know. So I'm kind of just addicted to one of those things right now, but in like, quote, real games. I'm consistently playing Final Fantasy 14 all the time. Like if I wasn't playing one of these stupid app games, I would probably be crafting a Final Fantasy 14 on the side. I just finished one of my horror games for my stream called Outlast, which is a horror game. It's kind of survival horror, but you don't shoot. It's like if Resident Evil didn't have the shooting thing, you just ran away. And also Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, which I should have streamed yesterday, but I was too tired after work and I did not. And I have a Baldur's Gate game going on with a few of my friends that we play weekly if none of us are busy or anything. But yeah, games all the time.
Wow, you have a lot of time to play games. I mean, I'm lucky if I get 4 hours of gaming time a week.
It's because I schedule it. Otherwise, I would not play anything except the shittiest phone games. So that's partly why I started streaming, because I was like, I have to cut out time in my life to play the games that I love, or else I might not play them because either I'm going to get stuck in like quick serotonin like crappy things, and if I'm responsible, I'm like, well, I should be vacuuming or something. So this is my way of being like, these 3 hours on Monday and Friday is when I play video games, unless something that is like solidly like superimposing like takes out that time. So few things do, and I can talk about that later, but yeah, I have to schedule it, and that's the only way I have the time.
No, that's really, really good that you schedule it. I've been trying to schedule time to play, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but just like to play Silent Hill 2 Remake, and I'm like, oh, I've got 3 hours. I'm going to play for 3 hours, and I get through an hour of that game, and it's so horrifying and scary and tense that I'm just like, no, 1 hour is good, and then I'm like, I have to pause and like decompress.
Man, I've never played Silent Hill. Like, I should probably get into that at one point.
It's a really well-made remake, actually. I saw one podcast. I haven't listened to it yet, just because I didn't want it to color my opinion of the game before I finish it. But they were comparing it to. They said it's the Psycho remake, so the 1998 Psycho remake, which is like a shot-for-shot, almost like one-to-one remake of the original Alfred Hitchcock Psycho movie, but like in video game form. And I'm guessing they mean like it's so accurate to the original game that like, why did you remake it at all? But I do find the controllable camera like is enough to like really freak you out.
Oh, I realize there's one game. That's why I like this backlog site, because it reminds me what I'm doing. There's this one game that I actually was playing, and then I put it to the side because I decided to do horror games for October. It's an indie one, so I do want to shout it out. It's called Code 7. I got it off of itch.io, and it was me going through this like huge backlog that we talked about off recording, well, pre-recording, where it's like entirely text-based with like a little bit of sort of animation in the corner where you play as essentially like a hacker man in the chair helping out your operatives, and it's pretty cool. But it is unfinished because they're releasing it in chapters, and the studio has just not gotten to it. So hopefully, if enough people play it or see it, they'll finish it, but who knows?
Amy, what have you been playing lately?
Aside from the usual Pokemon Go, I have been, because I have a 3-month trial of Apple Arcade, I downloaded Sonic Rumble, which is the Sonic Fall Guys, basically. I haven't put that much time into it, though, because right after the tutorial, it tells you to actually download the real game, or a bunch of data for the game. So I let that download, and I didn't play too much after that. I also, because of my free trial, I did download Sonic Dream Team, which is Apple Arcade exclusive. So because I have the trial and an iPad, I am excited to at least try out this game because I've heard really good things. And it will hold me over, I'm sure, until Sonic X Shadow Generations comes out next week.
Oh, next week. That's so soon. I didn't even realize it was that.
Very soon.
Yeah.
And also, it's so soon, but it would be even sooner if I did have something other than a Switch. Because if you download the Digital Deluxe Edition on everything but Switch, you get it 3 days early. So the regular release is October 25th. And I am just excited enough that I did consider looking for a used PS5 last week, but then I determined, no, I have parent-teacher interviews and things to do for the week. I can wait a couple days.
Is it that, like, you have to download it on, like, your same account or, like, play it on all of them? Because it's like, what if I downloaded it and that counted towards your total or something?
No, like it's a weird thing with the Switch where, like, for some reason something happened with Nintendo where they don't allow early releases for things. So yeah, I wait till the 25th. It's fine.
Isn't there also going to be some exclusive content that's locked behind every platform but Switch for this game?
So the only thing that's locked is the animation that they released in the past month to sort of hype up the game, which is, I think, a total of only about 15 minutes long. They have like an extended version of that, which is exclusive to PlayStation consoles. So if you download it on PS4 or 5, you get an extended version of the animated prequel, sort of for no extra charge. But the Switch has everything else that the other consoles have, aside from likely a, great frame rate. But I managed through Sonic Frontiers, so I think Shadow Generation should be okay.
Okay, so let's jump into the news. So like the last few weeks, there's not always a lot of queer news in video games, but there is some industry more industry turmoil with layoffs and stuff like that. So our first story, I saw it initially on Video Games Chronicle, but it also comes from initially Bloomberg. So Bandai Namco is laying off their employees, or at least they're trying to. So Bandai Namco, or BAMCO as some call it, has canceled several video games that were in development, and they're laying 200 of their staff off. But instead of actually laying them off, they're basically putting them in rooms and giving them nothing to do, which is a Japanese business practice called oidasha beya. So they're basically trying to make them quit out of boredom so they don't have to pay them severance, which is kind of a really crappy thing to do, to put it mildly. Like I would have some choice swear words to say if I could just like completely go unhinged and uncensored. But a quote from the article, so because BAMCO is denying this actually. So a representative of Bandai Namco told Bloomberg, Our decisions to discontinue games based on comprehensive assessments of the situation. Some employees may need to wait a certain amount of time before they are assigned to their next project, but we do move forward with assignments as new projects emerge. So this is all like PR speak for saying like, well, we haven't made a new project yet, so of course they're just twiddling their thumbs. But honestly, I feel like they can just say like, well, their excuse can be that they're not going to have any new projects come up until all these employees have gone, and then they don't have to pay them severance, and then they can, greenlight new projects. And I know that some studios even outsource their work and hire back these same people at a lower cost, so they save money. But I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts on this.
Are they still getting paid despite not having anything to do there?
Yes.
Oh, that's just like, if I was me, which is not, I'm not saying that they should do this or anything, because like obviously there's like, I can see somebody being like, well, my talents are best used somewhere else, and just going, or like feeling the disrespect that's like from the vibes. But I'm like, that's just, you do nothing, get free money. Like you just kind of sit around and like do your best and you still get paid. So in a way, that's kind of like, there is a benefit to the workers for just being like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna be here. Like, oh, I don't know if I can swear on this podcast.
I mean,
Forgot.
I can censor it if I'm not really sure what the rules are, but we're not monetized anyway, so it's fine.
That's fair. But yeah, just sitting around being like, well, I'm here. You hired me, so, give me work or like lay me off properly. Jeez. And yeah,
Well,
but it's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say 100 people agree with you because 100 have already quit and 100 are staying on supposedly, at least so far. So, I mean, I don't know how it works at every company and if this practice involves like taking away like phones and devices. I've read that some people do take this opportunity while they're getting paid to like look for their next job. And then once they find it, they leave.
That makes sense. It's disappointing though, because like Bandai Namco is like the original sort of company that made my very favorite game series, Katamari Damacy. So like, it's not that they've released an actual Katamari game in like forever. They've mostly done remasters, which I've gotten off of Steam. But like the original creator is doing his own thing, and he has his own company, I believe. I think it's called Uvula. So there's that.
Amy?
I did see what Devona mentioned about the Katamari series. There's a meme online of all the swords pointing toward the center of the table, and it has like Katamari fans, Gundam fans, Tales of fans, Dark Souls fans, all allied against Bandai Namco, the actual company that creates them. So it is quite sad that like there's all these fairly beloved franchises that now have a company that really is doing not great business practices. But I think, a lot of fans are used to that. Like, Konami fans have had to deal with their company basically sort of not existing, at least as it was. So it's definitely sad. Like, I feel for a lot of these franchises. I have a friend who's one of her favorite game series is Klonoa, which did have a brief resurgence, but there's a lot of fan favorite franchises in here. Like, when I first went to Japan, they had an entire Tales of store, and Dark Souls is beloved throughout the world, and from a lot of different audiences. So it'll be interesting to see how Bandai Namco comes out of this. I will say that that practice doesn't really surprise me. I wasn't in a business sort of environment in Japan, but there were days where there was no school for me to teach at, and some of the other foreign teachers as well, and we'd just be sat in an office away from the other people and said to do our thing. So it seems like a fairly likely scenario. I'm not sure about the taking the phones thing. I'm sure some of them would, but I don't think the powers that be would be too upset if they're using their time to find other jobs.
Yeah, especially if that's what they want. But yeah, that's a good point. Like, I did also think of like, I've seen this through Konami because I also do love the Metal Gear Solid series. And just like with Hideo Kojima, like I mentioned the creator of Katamari having his own thing, Hideo Kojima also has his own thing going on. We got Death Stranding to wait for. So I guess it's not that uncommon to have like your game company be kind of a piece of shit. Like even Nintendo has been getting a lot of like solid bad press of like its practices over like copyright over games that they don't even support. So like I don't think it's for like the big ones. There's no real there's no real winner here.
But unfortunately, for every Death Stranding or Bloodstained, the Castlevania creators project, you have a Mighty Number 9 that doesn't exactly pan out, or Rodea the Sky Soldier from now, I think, in jail, Yuji Naka. But, so I do love that these creators are going to Kickstarter or just other companies and making their own games. I think there's a Patapon spiritual successor coming out if it hasn't been released already, but a lot of these will fail because they don't have that sort of brand recognition and IP love that the original versions did. Like Yooka-Laylee never achieved what Banjo-Kazooie did.
I think some of these also have to do with the conditions in which they're released as well. Like, yeah, there's definitely a part of like having a big brand that helps sell it as well. But, you know, Banjo-Kazooie, it might have also, I don't know anything about it because I actually didn't play that, but it might partly been a product of its time because there's a whole lot of games like that coming out at the time. And at this point, like, I don't know if the 3D puzzle platformer thing that had going on is what people go off of. So I don't know. I also like hesitate to call Death Stranding the biggest success because I mean it's good, it's sold, and like it's like but I think it happened mostly off of the hype of like Hideo Kojima himself, and then a lot of people played it and they're like, what is this? I mean, it's good for somebody like me who kind of likes alternative game styles rather than just like run and gun, but a lot of people were like, what? Why?
Well, their
I'm
problem
just an
was
Amazon delivery guy.
They went with dead crabs instead of live crabs. That's the problem.
Of course. Rookie mistake.
So our next news story, Sony is touring a PlayStation orchestral concert worldwide. So this actually comes from the PlayStation blog, which is generally where Sony announces anything that's not in a video form for like a PlayStation showcase or I'm not sure, I can't remember what they call their PlayStation Directs, but so basically it starts in Ireland next year with more dates to come. And so far the games they've advertised as having songs in the concert will include The Last of Us, God of War, Horizon, Ghost of Tsushima, and then they put in quotes and more. Personally, I hope that means it includes Uncharted, and I'd be surprised if it didn't, because Uncharted has one of the most iconic theme songs among the PlayStation repertoire of games. But they announced a bunch of free dates in Europe. Sorry, but they didn't, and they announced that US would be coming, but they didn't mention Canada, where we live, unfortunately. But I would have to assume that Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, at the very least, would be some cities chosen down the road, maybe in 2026, because it does start in April next year. So, but any thoughts on video game concerts in general, or if you're excited for this, Amy?
I feel that if a tour is announced in Japan and it says the US, it's very likely that at least, you know, as you said, Toronto, Vancouver will be selected. I have seen the Zelda Orchestra, and I saw an earlier rendition of it where the conductor had a Wind Waker for the Wind Waker section, which was very cute. And I saw the Sonic Symphony just this past February. And I saw one of the first iterations of Video Game Live. So that was an adventure at the time. So I do really like video game concerts in general. I will say that because I don't have a huge history with the Sony first-party games. I did love Patapon, as I slightly implied earlier. But I think Flower and Journey are PlayStation properties, but those they're not really soundtrack prominent games. The thing I would absolutely love, and I would go to this for, even though I wouldn't understand or get the references of 95% of the songs, if they had a Parappa the Rapper segment with, I don't know, a real rapper as either the coach or Parappa, I think that would be so surreal and so entertaining that I would sit through 2 hours of, grimdark, moody songs that I don't get just for that one moment.
Devona?
I have also been to all like pretty much all of the ones that Amy has. One of them at the same time. We went to Sonic Symphony together. I went to one of the earlier Zelda reorchestrated and did see the Wind Waker as well. And I did see Video Games Live as well, back before all of that happened. Way before all of that happened. And they were pretty good. I've also seen the Final Fantasy Distant Worlds. That's my favorite one, and I wish I could go back. I'm like now actively following the Distant Worlds things to try to find out when it comes back to Toronto. Right now they're doing more of Final Fantasy VII, which I did see Final Fantasy VII remake reorchestrated a couple years back. I know they're doing a rebirth now, but I actually
went to the rebirth a few weeks ago, and it was incredible. It was so good.
It was like when they did the remake one, like I did not have a PS5 or Final Fantasy remake at the time, but we were so like I went with my sibling and we were both so into it that we were like, we have to get a PS5. It seems like a corporate shill kind of thing, but we were like, okay, we have to do this because we just went right back into that thing. But as it goes towards like other Sony titles, I've never really felt the soundtracks of like most of these big budget AAA games very much. There's not something that catches me, and I'm thinking of my own history with the video game concerts, and it's mostly for IPs that have come from that like simple melody back in the like early 2000s, late 90s that I latched onto growing up, and which makes it interesting for me when they make an orchestrated version, because it starts as like bleeps and bloops and then it comes out into an actual like composition that you can now feel the power of in the thing. So, and I also haven't played half of the games. Like I don't play like stuff like Uncharted or any God of War. I have God of War, but I haven't gotten to it yet. So those things wouldn't be quite up my alley. And like to me, they all sound like generalized movie soundtrack things. So like I don't know, it just doesn't stand out for me. But I do love video game concerts like that. In like generally, mostly just to specific ones.
So moving on, Sony and Amazon are rebooting their God of War show after the showrunners have quit. So once again, where I get most of my game news from Video Games Chronicle. So basically, the studios, Sony and Amazon, they want to move in a different direction. So the fact that these showrunners quit, I mean, reading between the lines here, I do work in film and television, and they're kind of saying like, well, the scripts got scrapped and the showrunners left, and we're not really sure who had the disagreement with who, and they could have basically been that the showrunners were given a pitch by Sony and Amazon, and they wrote one thing, and Sony and Amazon were expecting a different thing. It could be that Sony and Amazon saw what they wrote, which was exactly what they wanted, and which happens a lot when they decide we don't like that. And the showrunners are so dedicated to their story that they're telling that they quit. Generally, it's rare for creatives to stay around on a show or even sometimes a video game where you've changed the idea so heavily and you've spent a year or more invested in crafting this story, and now you are being told to go in a different direction. It's like really hard to rewire your brain to tell a different story, one that you're not as passionately interested in, that you spent a year developing. So it could be that Sony and Amazon are the bad guys here. It could be that the showrunners wanted to do something with it was wildly different from the games. But basically, we really won't know until the show comes out, if and when it does. If the showrunners weren't being faithful, or they were being too faithful, or Sony and Amazon don't want it to be faithful, because I know there's a big history there where video game adaptations, when they hit really well. I would argue Uncharted and The Last of Us. I know a lot of people didn't like Uncharted, but aside from the casting, I think they kind of nailed the tone of the games. Same with The Last of Us, they really nailed that. The Sonic movies were really good, but then I would argue stuff like Resident Evil and Detective Pikachu completely missed the point. So we won't know where this show ends up until it comes out. But hopefully Sony's track record is pretty good so far. So hopefully this will be good. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I will say that...
No, you go first.
Okay. I will say that with The Last of Us, it was a game that I never played, but I really enjoyed the TV series. That moment with that particular mammal. I'm not sure how you feel about spoilers on this podcast, but
I'll just give a warning. It's fine.
Okay. So the warning is here. So the scene with the giraffe, I've seen it, both the game cutscene, and obviously I don't have the experience of playing through the game to get to that moment, but something about seeing the real animal filmed was really spectacular for me. And from what I hear and what I've seen and what I've, I guess, read and seen from reviewers, they did a pretty good job with adapting the story that was there. There were a lot of similarities. But the series that I think is an interesting approach is Fallout, which I also haven't played the game of, but I really love the approach of this is a game set in the universe of the franchise. It's not like it takes a lot from different games. It does have a part in the timeline, but it is sort of its own story, even if it takes inspiration. And yeah, I just really like that approach. So I'm not sure if I would see God of War. I mean, I haven't played Last of Us or Fallout, and I still end up seeing and enjoying both those shows. It would probably depend on the tone. But yeah, I hope for the best, as always, for fans of the show and fans of Greek and or Roman and or Norse mythology.
Devona?
I have to be basically in the same camp where it's like I have not played a lot of the games that they make shows of because I don't know. It seems like the games that I've played either don't let them lend themselves very well to like a show format. Like I'm big into Final Fantasy, and I can't see them making a proper show out of any of that. And I please hope they don't, because I don't think it would go well. But
I disagree,
yeah,
actually. I think Final Fantasy VII would make an amazing TV show if you take 5 seasons and you actually like blend in all the side content that's in the other games, like Yuffie's origin and the Before Crisis storyline, and just like really build it out, because it's already so cinematic in the games that I think just like casting it in live action, like it'll look a little weird, but I think we have the money now to make it look like it does in the games with a little bit more realism.
I don't know, agree to disagree, but yeah, I also don't watch a lot of TV and movies. Like movies especially is something I've had to schedule to like get back on. So I not recently, but over this past couple of years, I have a group that we've been watching mostly horror media to catch up on, and that's been great. I do love talking about movies and seeing them when there's a good one, but there's so few that I see that I'm like, oh yeah, that impacted me, that I'm kind of like, so yeah, I didn't even know that they were making a God of War show, and like I probably wouldn't have tried to watch it if I did. But hopefully, it turns out great for the people that do are invested in it and everything.
Okay, so we have 2 more news stories. This next one is more kind of depressing news, but it's not as bad as Bamco's news from earlier, but and this once again, well, this actually comes from Twitter, a Twitter post from Surgeon Studios. Tales of Kenzera Zao developer Surgeon Studios is looking to fund their next project and unfortunately has put their staff on redundancy notice. So from their Twitter post, they wrote, "We've decided to put the work of the Surgeon Games division on hiatus while we secure funding for our next project. In the meantime, we've unfortunately had to put our team on notice for redundancy. Everyone at Surgeon worked incredibly hard to create Tales of Kenzera Zao, a game that truly comes from the heart. Their passion, creativity, and dedication are nothing short of extraordinary." So this is really bad to hear for me. I played some of Tales of Kenzera Zao. I really loved what I played. There's just so much to play, and I had to move this summer, so I put a lot of games on hold. And when I finally came out of resurfaced from the move, I was playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth before the concert, so I basically played that until till October. And now that there's so many new games come out, I haven't gone back to it. But what I did play, it's a very heartfelt story. It doesn't live up to the Metroidvania aspect that seemed to be advertised initially, but it's a really good action platformer with Metroidvania elements in it. It just feels so smooth and so buttery to play. It would be really disappointing if the studio didn't get a chance to make another game, to be honest, especially since like diversity seems really at the forefront of everything they're doing. But I wondered, have you guys played this game or heard anything about this?
Nope. This is the first time hearing about it. Metroidvanias haven't been like the genre that I'm into so much. I think I have like growing up trauma of being like, I'm bad at video games, which like my friends who pop into my stream are like, no, you're not. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But yeah, no, I haven't even heard of it or seen anything, so I don't have much comment to make on this one.
I forget what show it was, if it was Game Awards or if it was still back when E3 was existence, but I think I do remember seeing a trailer for it and being like very impressed with the music and not necessarily the graphics, but the art style and the sort of integration of, I think, I forget which tribes it was inspired by, but, African mythology and art and everything. And I think that it's kind of this sad a effect of this sad reality that it seems like these days, like a high 70, low 80 game is bad and it doesn't get, pushed by reviewers and people don't talk about it or celebrate it. And they just end up falling, to the wayside, which I think is really sad, especially for these heartfelt, sort of independent style games.
So we have one more final news story before we move on. I just want to get through the news super quick. So Spider-Man 2 for PS5, it was confirmed last night actually, that it will not be receiving any story DLC. So the game was announced to be coming to PC this January, and the PlayStation blog mentioned that the game won't be receiving any story DLC. So spoilers for Spider-Man 2 are ahead. So skip ahead about 3 to 4 minutes if you want to avoid those. But it was kind of expected after the game ended with a tease for a Carnage storyline. So it was, and it felt like more of a loose plot thread than like a typical post-credit scene. Like it felt like we were watching one cutscene and then suddenly like, oh, that storyline ended, and it's like, okay, well, they're probably going to pick this up in DLC. Especially for like a piece of side content that didn't feel as like tied to the main game. It was through another basically C plot in the game, like a very side story. So it felt like something that was going to be picked up in one of like the City That Never Sleeps kinds of DLCs that we got for the first game. And after the Insomniac leak happened last year, there was an implication that there would be at least some more story content coming, and I guess it's not coming, which is a little disappointing considering we had, like I said, 3 DLCs for the first Spider-Man game on PS4, and we also had the expansion Miles Morales. So I was kind of expecting some kind of like Venom DLC or Venom expansion. But anyway, for the purposes of moving on to our segment, we will skip discussing this piece of news too much. So I would like to move on to our segment for today, which is about avatars in gaming, both binary and non-binary. So before we get started, I want to just see if you have any thoughts, some initial thoughts on this.
I don't know if I am not the right person exactly, but the way I see avatars in gaming has always kind of been, I think it's just because I've always been not quite right in my gender, like growing up forever. So like I've learned to just never really put a whole lot of like investment in like whoever this guy is that I'm playing a lot. So it's kind of extended into like whatever. Like I think growing up after a while, I also thought it was cringe after a while. I'm like, I'm not gonna make myself. Like that was something that I did when I was like very young, and just like there's a point growing up that I find that was really common. It's not something that happens to everybody, obviously, where it's like when you're trying to find your identity and who you are and whatever, you start like attaching yourself to different things, being like, oh, this is who I am, oh, this is what it is. And like it's like that era where you wear a lot of shirts that say things on them because you're like trying to advertise yourself to the world, be like, this is my identity and this is who I am. And after growing up a bit, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like I don't necessarily need to announce that I'm into whatever, or like a joke or whatever on like, right, like as a sandwich board for something going around. Like what am I, an ad? So like I also stopped doing that with video games, being like, it's me in the game. Like, so what I end up doing more often is just seeing what the vibes of the game give me and then kind of just going with what it is. I have been largely surprised, not surprised, but like, or not, is that the word? But like elated a little bit to see the change in like different ways that you can have a person there, because I do think it is definitely a little bit annoying when it's just the two gender extremes. Like there's one really funny meme, or it's just a screenshot of an ad for like another one of these shitty mobile games, as I've talked about, but this is like a shitty anime mobile game somewhere where it's like choose your gender, and like male is just like, it almost looks like the default cutout of like some the anime schoolboy, you know, wearing his school uniform, and then like female is some wonderful butterfly magical thing. Like who knows what's going on with that, but you see her hair, like in silhouette, her hair is flying around and she's got butterflies and shit and whatever. And while that is extremely funny to see, and like it kind of tells on like how teen focused anime kind of sees itself and like it's people, every time things do that, I'm just like, but what if neither? Like what if that's not? So like, you know, that's always been kind of a point of annoyance for me, when it's like, okay, either I'm like this side of the stereotype or that, and then there's no way to like you know, have some nuance. It's a little bit like, not necessarily out of me, but just out of like respect for real people in the real world. Like it's not how anything works, let alone like queer identities.
Yeah, so that's actually what I wanted to talk about a little bit, because there is a severe lack of non-binary options in games, whether that's like a straight androgyny option with they them pronouns or just like some kind of spectrum where you can kind of pick what your gender is. And there's games like Pokemon and Dragon Age where you get to pick your gender and they kind of like really make you feel like you are that gender. Like in when I played Pokemon Legends Arceus, for example, and I played it fairly early in my transition. So for me, like I'm still in that phase where I'm like, where I play a game as a girl and like they really kind of like gas you up as that gender, as the gender you picked.
Mhm.
So in Pokemon Legends Arceus, the professor, like every other sentence, he calls you my girl. And I assume when you play as a boy, he calls you my boy or my lad. So like if you're a binary trans person, like it must feel really like exciting to play these games and hear those things, especially because I didn't get to hear those kinds of things as a kid. And your character is a kid, and especially in Pokemon where they kind of like treat you that way, like a preteen at least. But like in Pokemon, and I can't speak for Dragon Age specifically, although it didn't come up in my research, but Pokemon does not have non-binary pronoun options. There's no they them option. There are some non-binary, some games where non-binary is an option, but in the research I was doing, it did come up that but not only is it rare, but when they do have the non-binary option, they make the dialogue in the games very limited to when pronouns actually show up. And this is probably because as soon as you start adding more than 2 sets of pronouns, it starts to balloon from dialogue options to recording to coding. And I'm not a programmer or a coder. I have no idea how these things work, but I would have to guess that like the work would just like double or triple as soon as you add another set of pronouns as an option. So anything beyond he, him, or she, her starts to become difficult, especially from a company, any company that's not as familiar with it and probably thinking like, well, we would like to, but we don't want to F it up. So, Amy, you're very much on one side of the binary like I am. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I feel that, what you just said about like the language thing makes me think of the challenges with like the Romance languages, where a lot of things are incredibly gendered. So, a developer might want to release in Latin America and then scrap their potential original, gender inclusivity ideas, unfortunately, because of that potential nightmare. I think it's still an excuse, but definitely possible. I feel that, I definitely had a lot of the same feelings you did with Legends Arceus. And I think, I mentioned a little bit of this on my first episode, but there were games like Mabinogi or the little virtual town in Professor Layton, I think 4 or 5, where I was able to, really feel affirmed and explore sort of that identity that was, building inside me in some ways without even knowing. But like, even despite that, I feel that the options being limited is really frustrating, not only for gender diverse people, but even people with varying expressions. Like if you do select, a female character and suddenly you're locked out of short hair options or bald options, or in some cases like facial hair options, or even, muscle definition options. I think that's really sad. Some modern games are, being a little bit more open with that. I think Cyberpunk has I think you were mentioning on that first episode, the variety that has. And then with sort of my darling of gender expression, Animal Crossing New Horizons, it was the first Animal Crossing where they don't gender the clothing specifically. For I think the last 2 games, so the mobile game and the 3DS game, they didn't restrict you, but there were still some challenges there. But for New Horizons, they were pretty open with, it's like, these are just clothes you can buy, which, it's simple avatar creation, nothing, you're not dealing with muscle or bust sizes or anything, but that allows for a lot of, gender expression flexibility that you don't see all the time, which is pretty sad.
So Baldur's Gate 3 actually seems to be the crowning achievement, and I don't think it's perfect, to be clear, but Baldur's Gate 3 does seem to go the farthest with an option for like everything is kind of like independently customizable. I don't know if it goes in so far as like muscle and like a sleek body type, but you can choose your pronouns, voice, chest, and genitals all separately to make yourself as specifically as you want. Probably more so than even in real life sometimes. But I don't know if you can like choose like muscle definition or curves and like this, that, and the, like I don't know how in depth it goes, but it does seem to be the only game that allows you to independently customize all of these options to make yourself non-binary. And it also does have they them pronouns.
Yeah,
does anyone here play? Sorry,
I do play Baldur's Gate. As I mentioned, I have a game going with like a multiplayer game with some friends, and I have like made my character non-binary because it was kind of like, well, yeah, this was like one of the first ones where like I was caught between making a character be the character and like making the character me, because it is strange with the D&D thing. Like I have so many D&D characters that I've made of like various genders, but this was my first one that was like, this is a non-binary character. It does have that freedom in a lot of ways. There's no like muscle definition slider, but there's different like body types you can choose and then customize like the chest and the genitals like independently after that. So there is a bit more variation than you get from more games, but within that the options are few, which I found like not really disappointed because I knew this was like the only thing it did, but I didn't feel like I really got to do what I wanted to do. And so my character in that Carver is like a little different than I would have wanted to make them initially. But that's also like when you're doing a multiplayer and like your friends are waiting for you as you're like fucking with the character sliders, it's like, yeah, it wasn't the best way for me to like really get into like, what do I want here? Because I was like, oh no, they're all over there. Let me hold on. I'm so sorry. And then like getting through. But yeah, there was a surprising amount and like a very interesting amount of different things that you can do in there. It is nice to have the they them pronouns in the game. Even I don't recall that you really see that in like second person, third person. Yeah, like I think they managed because nobody really refers to a different character that way. So like all of the dialogue you experience is from your own perspective. And if you listening to somebody else's dialogue, they don't talk about like anyone else except for the named main characters. So like every time Carver goes into a thing, they're always like, you, yeah, you, that. And like in text, I think it says they, like whenever like, you know, Carver picks up something or Carver does something in like the text read on the side that you can kind of go to see the history, you get your they them pronouns. But like most recordings, it's just like, you are good, okay, like you're a good whatever. And like I think they just have like a thing for some feminine pronouns of like, you're the kind of lady that, or like you're the kind of guy that. It hasn't really stood out to me like what they do when they have to use something like particularly gendered, but I think they managed to get away with it because everything is just like, you know what I'm talking about, or like, how are you doing, or something like that. I think actually they default they them onto like fine sir or something like that, which I like because I'm like slightly more on the butcher masculine side than like the other side, but I'm gonna pay attention to that more now because like for the most part I was just like, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna kill my whole party if I say this? Rather than being like, are they referring to me right? You know, it is definitely a standout for that. I wish the body options were like more not diverse, but like more specific that you could make. But I also know that that's a huge technical challenge as well, so it doesn't feel like a failure or anything.
Instead of sir, I kind of wish they went with something esoteric, like doctor or champ or something. But maybe those would be too humorous, obviously. But, you know, there are some gender-neutral honorifics that you can throw in there.
It's true, and they might be actually using them. It's just that I didn't remember them at the time because I was more concerned with what I was doing rather than like what it is. I think I would get a better sense of it if I was playing a solo campaign. So like a lot of times, like when you're doing the multiplayer thing, you're also talking to your friends on the side and having opinions about what you should do and like everything. So that kind of like takes the focus away. Whereas like if I'm playing on my own, I can fully be like, okay, well, this is what happened. Talk to chat and whatever. It's like on my own pace. Yeah, you brought up something with Pokemon and stuff, which like, yeah, like one thing that I do appreciate, like Animal Crossing definitely in terms of the clothes is like the shining star, and I feel like that's because it's easier, or like it makes the most sense to make your game options like that more gender variable when there is a sense of humor to it, because you're not like, not that it's not taking the idea of being genderqueer not seriously, but like there's a bit more freedom because like, you know, cis people might use it as a joke, but then like that also allows for the freedom of like, you know, trans people to be for real, or like gender queer people in general to be for real with it, and like it just helps with the vibes. And Animal Crossing is like it's a very kind of like casual chill thing, whereas like something like Baldur's Gate, they're doing it very seriously, so they take it seriously, and that kind of keeps them from just casually like putting things out for funds like that. But for stuff that is more solidly gendered, something I do appreciate that Pokemon has been doing more, like the last one I played was Pokemon Scarlet Violet. That was the last one that I played, but I have appreciated that they have in this one, which they didn't have in Sword and Shield, that you would choose the gender but you still get the hairs from like every other gender, and it's fine. Like if you choose to be like a woman or like something, you get a specific maybe body type, which is like gendered, but like you can still get pixie cuts or whatever. You can do whatever you want. And like Miis are like that also, where you could like, I think the Mii that I use for whenever I have to build anything on like a Nintendo console, it is like a mask body, but then there's like, you know, different feminine things that are tacked onto it here and there, which I appreciate, because that's more kind of the way it gives you like a more subtle way of like defining yourself that way.
Well, for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet specifically, because I was going to mention that, because you really can't change your outfit too much unless you play the DLC and you go to a different school. But like the outfits are locked because you're supposed to be students, you're supposed to be out in the world representing the school. So they took out like a lot of customization options, and I think to compensate, they made all the haircuts available across both genders. But I have this feeling that, because Game Freak does this a lot, where they'll like introduce a feature in one game and then remove it in the next game. Like they'll probably bring back clothing customization if they can manage it. But I think because of that, they might make the hairstyles available to both genders. But I think like if you want to wear a dress as a man, or if you want to wear like a certain kind of pants or hat or shirt as a woman, you're not going to be able to. I think they're still going to lock it between the two genders, and they certainly won't introduce a third set of pronouns, or even, we haven't even talked about it yet, but like neo pronouns are basically non-existent in all the games we've talked about, because that would just be, I would imagine, just from a technical perspective, it would be a nightmare. But even then, like even in the trans community, neo pronouns are like unfortunately still laughed at in some circles. So yeah, I think for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I think that was like a one-off thing, and like we might be lucky to see haircuts like that come back in the next game. But I certainly don't think when they bring back all the clothing customization, you won't be able to be a man in a dress or a woman. And I really don't know what you could put on a woman that wouldn't really, the way the clothing works. It's basically, it's only the feminine clothes you couldn't give to a man, because I think most of the female clothing is basically the same. Maybe the shorts get shorter, so you wouldn't be able to wear the longer shorts as a woman, but like Pokemon is so, for lack of a better term at the moment, because I'm blanking on other words, like Pokemon's kind of prudish. So like the short shorts are like an inch or two shorter than the like regular length shorts. So like it's not really noticeable aside from the haircuts and stuff like dresses and skirts. Okay. So next thing I wanted to talk about, when I was doing some research for this podcast, I came across that The Sims 4, I think it is, because Sims 5 doesn't exist yet. I feel like I don't really play Sims, so I don't know the full story about what's going on with that, but I feel like I've read that 5 is in development maybe, but 4 is the one that just came out like maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. But at one point they did patch in they them pronouns. But on the other hand, there's Stardew Valley, which is like a huge queer game, because you can like romance anyone, and you can basically be whoever you want to be on your farm, but there are still no non-binary options. There's no they them pronouns in the game, and fans have been asking for years. And I came across a Polygon article, and in the comments section, there were people talking about how it may indicate like a lot of games don't, and we were talking about this a little bit before, but like games don't plan for they them pronouns because it makes it very difficult. Like it's really hard to patch them in later, basically, like unless you plan for them. And even when you plan for them, there's like so many things you have to do in the coding to make it work, that like, and like you were mentioning earlier, Devona, Baldur's Gate 3, I actually read that it wasn't just your experience. There are very few scenarios where they actually are using your pronouns because of the way the game is developed in it. It probably works in their favor that they can give you those pronouns and they can give you that customization option without having to worry about it so much in the programming. One commenter, E. Marley, said, localization would be another one. There's a good chance every sentence in the game that contains a pronoun or reference to the player's gender would need a slight rewrite to accommodate the new player pronoun option. And that would need to be made. That change would need to be made in every language the game is localized in. So Amy, you mentioned that before. And then yes, they said there's a good chance it's all been coded for 2 options without accommodation for more. And then Tarnus, another user, replied, my partner's brother is a developer for a pretty big and Polygon beloved indie game. And I remember a point in the process where they were trying to brainstorm how to go back in and make their pronouns more inclusive. They had countless problems getting the dialogue to react appropriately, particularly because it was more than pronouns. They had references to player-controlled characters becoming mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, etc. It really illustrated the big lesson about this stuff. You have to build for inclusion from the start. Conception is where diversity, equity, inclusion, justice can be flexibly built in. Putting it in after the fact is usually a losing battle. So this would explain things like Baldur's Gate 3, Fae Farm, and Harvestella, are other games too where they use pronouns and dialogue so sparingly because the complexity of coding in multiple options while also recording hundreds if not thousands of alternate takes for games with voice talent is also a concern. So like it just and we were talking about this earlier, but it just kind of balloons. And I don't want to say it is an excuse, but like we're in a time right now where game development just keeps like getting harder and harder. Games keep taking longer and longer to develop and things keep getting bigger and bigger. Well, people want the scope to change. People want longer games. People want better graphics. So when costs are being cut, I might imagine the first place they're going to cut them is making trans-friendly and non-binary friendly options for players.
There's also the other side, which is like based Undertale, which is like there's only one gender and it is a they. That's it. That is a way to like cut costs so extremely while also being inclusive in a manner of way, because you don't have to do the 2 dialogue options for male and female. You just have to do the one, and it's for everybody, which obviously like there is a host of like commentary and things that could happen with that like, people like their genders. Obviously, like you two are a very solid example of like you have like the specific gender that you like and that is how you are. But that is like a fun standout example of like how it has been controlled for in a way that not a whole lot of other games do.
Well, yeah. So that's the other thing too, is like there's lots of games where like you mentioned Undertale, and that's the first example that I actually wrote in my show notes here, is that there are lots of playable characters that are non-binary that like it's already programmed in where like the player character is just built from the start. There's one player character or there's like multiple player characters, but like it's not an avatar where the game has to react to you as a person playing yourself in the game, but like it's just like a scripted story like Goodbye Volcano High where there's Fang who's non-binary. In Apex Legends there's Bloodhound. Borderlands 3 has Flack, who's a robot, who's like inherently non-binary because they don't have a gender, because like I said, they're a robot. There's Floofty Fizzlebean, which is, I've never played Bugsnax, it's on my list, but just saying that name makes me want to play it so bad. Floofty Fizzlebean. Everyone say it with me, please.
Floofty Fizzlebean.
There's Sundance from Battlefield 2042, which actually shocked me that it was like a game of Battlefield of all games. That's like putting non-binary characters in COD. Like the people that play, I can't imagine the people that play COD care about that. I'm like pigeonholing them. Also, I'm sure there's trans people that play COD as well, but and all these games I'm listening to have had controversies because of these things too. And then there's the last example I have is Venture from Overwatch 2, and they even have the colors of the non-binary flag built into their outfit, which on one hand is like really cool, but on the other hand is like that's in your face.
That's true. And there's a decent amount of things, and it's nice to see that be a thing. Like the coding puzzle, it's just like another puzzle, really. I feel like it's something that over time, if like somebody manages to figure out the way to do it that works for the whole thing, that's just gonna be how everybody does it eventually. And but it was interesting to hear like how people like when trying to code things to include gender neutral pronouns after the fact, they're into a whole host of things. It just shows that how ingrained the binary is in like everything that society kind of does. Like you're just so used to talking about things within like, you're a man or a woman and this is what happens, like through everything, through marriages to bathrooms to like relationships to like family to everything. So, it does really illustrate how much that you don't have to think about it when it's not about you.
I've written guides for teachers that explain that you can do a report card comment without using a binary gender or any gendered language at all. You can just write like student was an exemplary member of the class this semester. Excellent work yielded excellent results. Like, a lot of people think that you can only be stiff and awkward, and yeah, it might seem a little bit unusual. I think if you're writing, dozens of them in order, but like only, the one parent or child or student is going to read each of them, so it won't seem as unusual for them. Obviously, when you're looking at an entire game script, it becomes quite different and, yeah, probably a programming challenge, but I don't think one that is completely insurmountable. I really feel that someone can program a script, program a piece of code that can sort of instantly load in sort of a secondary or like shadow script that will, replace the necessary parts with the non-binary compliant or friendly or inclusive version. Like, this might be one of the weird instances where more computing power actually will help something other than graphics, which are things that I always find really interesting and delightful. So, it's hopeful that with, advances to the other parts of, the memory and the processing and the access to storage space, like this sort of thing does become easier and it's not a challenge and it stops being what essentially is an excuse.
So I'm still early in my journey to learn Japanese, but the sense that I'm getting is that there's not a lot of opportunity in the Japanese language for gender neutrality. Especially when like a lot of games come out of Japan. And again, I'm speaking to this from a certain place of ignorance, but I have to imagine that like a lot of games come from Japan, but there's also a lot of games that originate in other languages where everything is so gendered, like we've discussed before. And I have to wonder that like, even if there are non-binary people developing these games in Japanese or other countries, and I'm certain that Pokemon is not being developed, and Mario games aren't being developed by non-binary people primarily, but I have to wonder if like languages where gender neutrality is not really at the forefront or even a thought really in the language, that the developers are not even considering that on the outset in other languages because they're developing it first and foremost in their native tongue. I know, Amy, you lived in Japan for a year, and I was wondering if you could speak to if you know anything about that, about gender neutrality in Japanese, because like Nintendo is a huge part of the industry, and Nintendo is also a huge part of kind of being behind in terms of queer representation too. So
yeah, it's interesting. Like when it comes to gender neutrality, in Japanese, it is difficult on the surface to do so. But there are kind of like English certain words, teacher, doctor, I think lawyer, but like a lot of these job title type of titles don't indicate gender at all. Like sensei for teacher is like an honorific that replaces Miss or Mr. or Mix in English. And it is like, at least for, I guess, third person usage, really helpful for things like that. When it comes to sort of personal usage, I think the most famous one is the conflicting uses of the Japanese equivalent for I, where, there are completely cis female characters that will use the masculine, I think it's boku, for I, which, traditionally implicates like, oh, this person is a tomboy, or this person is, a delinquent, or they're masculine, or, in some cases like, oh, that, it's a butch lesbian or something like that. So there's a lot of ways for gender play and like gender expression with the language, but it's one of those things where I'm sure a lot of the queer language translated into Japanese is just going to be romanji. If you really want to talk about a transgender person in Japan, it's probably going to be like a romanized like transgender. Like it is going to be something like that because they have a lot of words like new half, but is that offensive? Who finds that offensive? Ask the queer and trans and non-binary people in Japan, like, do you find this offensive? So many arguments in Japan. There's some recent one going on with a game where there's dialogue with this dating sim. I think it's a Miku game or something where one of the characters goes like, oh, so you're not a real girl, or so you're really a boy, or something like that. And the character they're talking to looks devastated. And so people are using that as evidence that, oh, it's just a crossdresser. And other people are saying a crossdresser wouldn't look that devastated. And then people will say, actually, in Japan, crossdressers act like this, and they would be as devastated if their costume or their presentation was called out. And it just gets, Yu-Gi-Oh! Trap carded over and over again as I observe these horrible Twitter threads. But
cycle of infinite nuance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really speaks to, the cultural differences where you probably will need like a team of fluent Japanese and English speakers to kind of parse this out, like actually finding, a non-binary or trans person in Japan who has grew up in Japan but has an English speaking or other language speaking parent, and see what that person thinks about this whole thing, because it's probably not going to be a cookie cutter easy solution. It's going to take a lot of discussion and possibly, unfortunately, a little bit of time in order to figure out what the best approach is, especially when dealing with non-binary or different interpretations, different expressions that may not be able to translate. Like, we don't call sushi raw fish bunches or something in English. We call it sushi. So yeah, it might be a situation that we need to wait and see.
That is definitely like an interesting thing, though, like how much language itself also defines our interactions with gender, and how like easy it seems to write a story in queer from queer perspectives. Like, I don't know how one would deal with like the generalized genderedness of everything from the Romance languages. And there is stuff like there are languages that don't have gendered pronouns. Like Tagalog is one that is like solidly like a standout, which does not make use of he or she. They only have one kind of non-binary pronoun that they use for everything, even though the society itself is not, it is rather traditional in a lot of senses. There is a huge queer population in the Philippines, probably stemming from part of this, but also like the general colonization history that has been applied to it as well. But yeah, a lot of times if you run into somebody who's like a native Tagalog speaker, they will often switch your pronouns just involuntarily, just because they try to pick it out of their bag of pronouns in their head that they're like, oh yeah, English does this, and they pick wrong, and they're like, shit. And then they have to like either correct or they don't realize, and they just keep going. So it's not really a thing of like trying to say anything or offend you or even affirm you. It's just like, I don't know, man. I'm just trying to speak the thing. But it is something that I do wonder if the gender coding problem is a thing that is like, if there is a language somewhere where that is not a problem, where it's just like, well, yeah, it's pretty easy to do this because of the way that we have our language. It just easily flows. Like, there's so many different languages and cultures in the world that do act together to make these things that we kind of just take for granted and like we live through every day. You gotta wonder if there's like some language somewhere in all of this that is like, actually, that's not a thing here.
But even if there isn't a language that does that, I think the sort of challenges you brought up with Tagalog is like potentially part of the key to, at least one possible solution to this, which is like maybe a character or in a game or a TV show or whatever just switches languages for their pronouns if it doesn't fit. Like if, there is a language where there is no, she, say she in English or a different language, and that character can, maybe that's like a hint that they're non-binary or a different gender expression. I take it back to Sonic. Sonic says English all the time in Japanese. Like even, the Japanese kids that I taught, they would randomly, when it was English class, they just say, "Oh no, Mamma Mia," just completely randomly. I think a lot of people know how much English is incorporated into other languages. I think that's, a potential solution. Not perfect, not ideal, but at least it's something. And I think incorporating a Roman character into dialogue, if that is all you can do as a Japanese developer to, help make a non-binary character work, have it be a character quirk.
Well, all this too, you mentioned, developers having to figure it out. The developer also has to be willing to learn and to listen. And before I transitioned, even though I was I had my ear to the ground on trans issues, I was still scared to reach out to a group that I felt I wasn't a part of, at least before, to find out that information and to get to get the education that I needed to be able to implement this. And it can be very intimidating to ask questions, especially when the question is the wrong question to ask. So it would require these old-fashioned companies, especially Nintendo, to start that dialogue when it's so intimidating, when you can offend someone so easily, and it's just easier and cheaper to not do that. So I think all of this starts at the very top, where people are making these games and they have to want to try to include these options and find a solution, no matter what solution they find.
Yeah, it can be tough to figure out what needs to be asked, because there is a particular thing that shows up in a lot of leftist circles, which is true in a way, but it also makes it tough, where it's just it's not my job to educate you, which is true in a lot of things. But cycle of infinite nuance, there is it depends on how you're coming at the situation and the vibes, or if the person you're asking has had a bad day that day, or 50 people have asked those questions. So yeah, I also understand the struggle it is to actually get the information, but if one really wants it, you find it. And that's the thing with a lot of these companies and games. When it comes down to it, they don't, a lot of the company as a whole doesn't really want it, because it's not that easy, and they're well, we have better things, quote, better things to spend our time on, we're going to do that, and we know that we're going to make money even if we make a game with only he, him, and she, her pronouns, and then that's fine. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, it's a thing that hopefully as time goes on and we see more development in people and also culture and understanding, that maybe something is going to come up and be better, and also from people like us doing the groundwork ourselves whenever we have the opportunity.
Amy, any last thoughts?
No, I think we've covered this pretty nicely, and I do. I guess my last thought is I am very impressed that with Devona and I here, this didn't turn into 2 hours of Undertale Deltarune talk when I knew that we'd be talking about non-binary characters in games. So congratulations to us.
Yay, high five.
Well, we need something else for another episode at some point, so...
The big Undertale. Probably whenever they come out with the next Deltarune chapter, then we just have us being oh boy.
Well, thank you both for joining me, Devona and Amy, this week, and I will see all of you true avatars next week. Thanks for listening.